know I shouldn't say this or wish it, but I'm just at the point like Israel, do it, attack Iran, see what happens. Let's just end this. Like just I know I'm tired of seeing starving children and dead toddlers, like
Hmm.
being blown apart, people being burned alive in tents. Like
Yeah.
we've been subject to this for 18 months. It has to end. I know I shouldn't want war because I know how it's going to be just so terrible, but I just want this to end in Gaza, and it seems like it won't end. And what will happen is that they'll continue with this genocide and keep on pushing people to their limits and continue provoking Iran, provoking all their neighbors until there is some type of strike. And then when it does happen, all right, sure, the U.S. might get dragged in, but nobody's going to support the U.S. on this anymore, including its own citizens. The majority of people, we've seen enough. We've had enough. We know that this isn't in our interest. We know we're doing this for Israel. We're not doing it for ourselves. So I'm at the point, let's get it over with.
Well, no, I understand that, and I can't say that I don't share those feelings. But I also understand, let's say, the caution on the part of Iran, because they know, they're the ones who are going to suffer. We're out over here, and we don't really have to worry about bombs, dropping on our cities, but the Iranians do, and so they have to be very cautious. They have to be very restrained. Um, it's a tough call. I was actually just this morning. I watched um, it was just a video clip of Pepe Escobar. Right, he actually was directly asked an Iranian general. He said, "Excuse me, sir, stop." And through an interpreter said, "Hey, why have you not carried out True Promise 3?
Right.
We had True Promise 1 and True Promise 2. Those were the retaliatory strikes on Israel that we mentioned earlier. But the Iranians had said quite clearly that they would retaliate for the most recent strike, which Israel carried out. When was it? It's been
Like 6 months or so.
easily six
Yeah.
months. I think it may be even longer than that. Closer to 8 months, I think. And he said that, oh, we are going to carry it out. And one thing that Pepe Escobar also said was that, look, your restraint is interpreted as weakness in Tel Aviv and in Washington. And the general responded and said that, we can't we don't really, we consider our own needs, and, we don't, we've learned to stop thinking about the way our enemies think of us. But we will carry it out. We will do it at a time of our choosing, when it is most to our benefit. And yeah, I can understand actually where he's coming from, because they have to calculate this very carefully. Lives are in the balance, and they're the future of their country is in balance. And yeah, I can understand like what I think Pepe Escobar was feeling. I feel it the same way. It's just like somebody has to do something, and this outrage has to end, and the Israelis need to be taught a lesson, and so on and so forth. But again, they understand we do this if we miscalculate. It could be a catastrophe for our country. So they just have to proceed carefully. But the way things are going, there's a real chance that your wish will be fulfilled, that Iran, will launch a major attack on Israel, either as a result of some, extreme provocation on the part of Israel, or of, an attack, an all-out attack carried out by Israel and the U.S. And that could happen. You could see, see your wish fulfilled sometime this year. There's certainly a real chance of that. But I can understand the Iranian concern. I would be very fearful. It's just like they're really between a rock and a hard place. They failure to retaliate, encourages further provocations. Retaliation maybe just will can be be the trap that the enemy, in this case Israel, is laying for you. and you're trying to avoid it because you know that they want you to attack. They're going to try to use that to bring in the U.S. And you don't want to be fighting a war with the U.S. Even if you think you're going to survive it and you're going to teach the U.S. a lesson. It's going to, your country is going to suffer, and that suffering could be really very, very extensive. And who knows? You just have to proceed very, very cautiously.
Right. I mean, I'm not Iranian. It's not my country. I'm in no place to say what they do. Obviously, they act in their best interest. And I'm very grateful for their support for the axis of resistance. But if the Yemen, I think, is showing us that you can handle things. I mean, obviously, I can't say with Iran, it might be completely different how they handle it. But I mean, the Yemenis have far inferior air defense. They have far inferior missile capabilities. But they're doing something. They're actually doing something. They're stopping the U.S. empire in its tracks. They're making them lose control in the region. The U.S. hegemony is no longer omnipotent in the area. It doesn't exist really. The Houthis have divided the poorest country in the Arab world, and they're So I think if they can handle it, then obviously it's not my place to say. But you just wonder how many provocations can Iran take?
Yeah.
And each provocation that they don't answer, it just gives further and further fuel to the Iranian cause inside when there eventually is a retaliation from Iran, that there's going to be no global support for the side of Israel and the United States at this point. I mean, how many times they blow up their embassy in Damascus? They assassinate Hania during the inauguration of the president in the capital city of Tehran. Your port mysteriously blows up. Just again and again, countless assassinations over the years, countless terrorist attacks against your country, people, all these threats, sanctions, this constant vilification. I just think I feel like the provocation meter is full enough now that if they do launch an attack against Israel, that they will have the world's support behind it.
Right. Well, I think clearly if you were the president of Iran, they would have attacked already. And probably I would have too, to be honest. But we're not, and probably we shouldn't be, or somebody with our personality. It's very interesting because what you say, I think you can draw a lot of parallels between Russian behavior and Iranian behavior.
Right.
And Putin was recently interviewed, about the very broad topics of the wars and dealings with the West. And he went into just this issue. He said, we have, seen these provocations. And he said, but that we understand that these provocations are designed to get us to escalate in a way that the enemy wants us to escalate. The Ukrainians, for example, similar to the Israelis, they very much want to bring in these other powers directly on their side. And so that's what they're hoping to do. They're hoping that Russia, for example, after the ATACMS strikes on Kursk and other pre-2014 Russian territories, would strike, for example, as they would be justified in doing, according to the laws of war, that they, at that point, that they would have struck one of these military bases in NATO territory, in, let's say, Romania or Poland or something, in response. And you could say, this is fair. You, NATO, the U.S. in particular, you attacked Russia. Okay, well, we're going to attack NATO. But Putin is always, put the brakes on that, said, we're not doing that. So we got for example, it's kind of similar to what the Iranians did. They do these demonstrative strikes, like the Oreshnik strike. That was mainly a demonstration. Hey, look, this is what we can do. But it falls short of provoking them and falling into the trap that the enemy is laying. So he said, yeah, no, we know what's going on. They're provoking us and they're trying to get us to retaliate in these ways. But Pezeshkian is, I think, very much like Putin and previous Iranian leaders too. In the end, you try to make I don't think there's a huge contrast like between Raisi and Pezeshkian that sometimes people make. Pezeshkian clearly was somewhat naive at the start, but I think starting with Inauguration Day, he began to see what was really going on. So he's pursued the same kind of policies, basically. Yeah, he knows what's going on, and he has to strike this balance. Okay, yeah, we need to respond in some way because we have to show, okay, that we're not weak, and we need to try to deter further attacks, but at the same time, we can't fall into the trap of the enemy and escalate. Before it's really to our benefit. It's just like Putin says, we just have to keep focus on winning the war. And they're trying to shift our focus to something else. And so we just stay, we've got a winning strategy. We don't deviate from that course. And I think the Iranians are doing the same thing, is that, look, we have a winning strategy and time is on our side. Actually, with every passing year, I've mentioned how in general, the larger context has favored them, and also their internal strength has increased over the years. With every passing month, Iran is in a stronger position vis-a-vis Israel. If a war had broken out several years ago, who knows what would happen. Now it's looking very good for Iran. And then a year from now, it'll look even better. So again, they have an incentive to hold off. Now, I know in the meantime, there's this horrible, horrible genocide going on in Gaza. But a war between the U.S. and Iran could also be catastrophic. And in the end, even more people could die in that war than are going to die in Gaza. Who knows?
Yeah. I just feel like the U.S. military is so impotent now. I just feel like we couldn't even do a war, and so then things would just end, and then we would just have chaos here domestically. I just don't think that it's really even possible for us to go to war with Iran.
Again, you never know until it actually happens. We hear, I think our analysis is sound. We've seen I think above all, what's happening in the Red Sea. And that tells you that Iran is in a strong position. And the fact, again, the very important fact that the U.S. and Israel has not attacked Iran in any kind of significant way. Again, that tells you that they have real deterrence. So, there's no question. But it's just like nobody ever knows what's going to happen once a war begins. There can be surprises, and there can be flukes. Maybe some of these multi-ton bombs do get dropped on significant targets, or maybe one lands on the wrong target in the middle of Tehran or something. Who knows? There's just all kinds of things going to happen in a war. So, you want to avoid, you don't want to really unleash the hounds of war until you're really, really certain, that you can defeat the enemy. And I think probably the Iranians are fairly confident, but again, they'll be even more confident a year from now and 2 years from now. They may not be able to wait that long. Maybe it will be this, next month because it's just hard to tell with the Americans and with Trump.
Or with Israel. What's Israel going to do?
Yeah. Well, you're right. Yeah, they're probably the ones that are going to provoke it. You're right.
Right.